Canada illegally, skipping the line and jumping the queue, and coming from safe places like upstate New York, while those who are facing real persecution, civil war, natural disasters have to wait longer. And what I've said this week is that we will close the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement, stop the flow of illegal border crossers, so that we can have an immigration system that is fair, orderly, and compassionate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Chair. Tom Perry with CBC News. You accused Mr. Trudeau of lying again tonight. But this week, your campaign put out a news release questioning Mr. Trudeau's time as a school teacher and why he left that position. That's, of course, been subject of much rumor, much innuendo. So I guess my question to you is, you're accusing Mr. Trudeau of being a liar, and yet your campaign is dealing in rumor and innuendo. Why is that?
Well, first of all, asking someone to come clean about something is entirely appropriate in politics. And when we're talking about lying, let's remember that even this week, on Monday, and even afterwards, Justin Trudeau continues the lie that the Globe and Mail story on his interference in the SNC-Lavalin case was false. We now know that it was true. He said he never put pressure on Jody Wilson-Raybould. We have her testimony, and we have audio tapes of his clerk of the Privy Council putting that pressure on her. We know that he has lied about his role in that. So when Canadians look at who they can have faith in, who they can put their trust in, it's not someone who has a history and a pattern of being a liar.
Why should they have faith in someone who's trafficking in innuendo and rumor? And if I may, Mr. Trudeau faced some questions tonight on this. You've had 4 hours with Mr. Trudeau this week. Why didn't you bring it up?
Well, let's remember, first of all, the questions that were put to him by mainstream Canadian media sources. So if you have an issue with that happening, then I suggest you can speak to some of your colleagues about that. This week, I had very limited opportunities to actually have a debate with Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau skipped out on the first 2 debates. He missed the Maclean's one, and the second one was canceled because he refused to participate. This evening, I had one opportunity to have a real face-to-face exchange. Monday night, I had very limited opportunities for that as well. So unfortunately, in a campaign that is over 40 days long, the amount of time that the only two people who really could become Prime Minister of this country have had an opportunity to debate each other is actually very low.
This evening, once again, you talked about a conspiracy between the PQ and the Bloc after the election. Well, the PQ has 9 MNAs. Isn't that a desperate maneuver on your part to win votes in Quebec? Not at all. What I did tonight was to draw attention to the fact that Mr. Blanchet claims to be the best friend of Mr. Legault, that he will be defending Quebec in Ottawa. But his real priority is to revive the sovereigntist movement. So I challenged Mr. Blanchet this evening because he's always talking about the Legault government and the CAQ in terms of who to vote for in the next election in Quebec in 2022. I believe that Quebecers must know that Mr. Blanchet, the day after this election, will be working for the Parti Québécois and against Mr. Legault to revive the sovereigntist movement, sharing his resources, his list, and his volunteers to help the PQ. Yet, but on what basis? Because we're talking about a party that has 9 MNAs in the provincial parliament, in the National Assembly. How is that a threat in this campaign? Well, I believe that it's important for Quebecers to know that after the election of the 21st of October, all Bloc MPs will not be working for Legault or the CAQ MNAs. They will be working for the PQ and try to help the PQ. It's not my opinion. It's a fact. It's the very raison d'être of the Bloc Québécois and the Parti Québécois. So I challenged Mr. Blanchet tonight to be honest about his intentions after this election, because right now he's claiming to be the best friend of the CAQ government, and he's trying to be a kind of a Trojan horse. Oh yeah, I'm on the same side as Mr. Legault, all this and that, but we know that the day after this election, he will work very hard to fight against Mr. Legault and against the CAQ government.
Rebel Media. Justin Trudeau's platform says that he will ban certain speech on the internet, especially speech that is deemed, quote, hurtful. I'm wondering why you haven't been more vocal about any opposition to that, if you are opposed to that, given your primary campaign. You talk so much about free speech on university campuses. Why doesn't that apply to the digital world?
Well, you're right to point out that during the leadership race, I proposed a policy that I am very proud of and that I am committed to, which is to prioritize federal research funds to universities that protect free speech on campus. And I think we have to make a very clear distinction between hate speech and incitement to violence and opinions that some people may not be in agreement with. And you have a right not to be persecuted because of your faith, because of your sexual orientation, because of your race, but we have to ensure that we protect free speech in this country. We don't want to give the power to the government to control speech at the expense of a legitimate debate over issues, and that's why I will always be on the side of fighting fiercely against hate speech and those who promote hateful ideology and legitimate free speech, robust discussion on issues and ideas.
Thank you. That's it.
Oui, en fait, je voulais juste savoir si...
I just wanted to know if you're ruling out the possibility of collaborating with the Bloc Québécois. You're attacking them a lot. There will possibly be a minority government. I know you will say that you will be a majority government, but at what point would you be able to work with the Bloc Québécois or not? Well, we're solely focusing on our objective, which is to form a majority conservative government. That's our target, and that's what we're concentrating on. But Quebecers,
we are only focused on winning a majority conservative government. That is our number one objective. That is the only thing we are focused on. That is the only thing we are working towards.
Et comment pourriez-vous faire fonctionner un gouvernement si le Bloc
and how
Québécois
would
qui
you
aurait la
make the
balance
government
possible?
work if the Bloc Québécois has the balance of power? Do you see conflicts on the horizon? I know that Quebecers are not interested in holding the balance of power. They rather want MPs around the decision-making table. And that's my promise to Quebec voters, that with the Conservative Party and with Quebec Conservative MPs, they will be at the decision-making table and not just hold the balance of power. And talking about the balance of power, there are many issues that Quebec wants to address and that require an executive decision-making power from the Prime Minister. If Justin Trudeau remains the Prime Minister of Canada, that will be saying no to a single tax return for Quebecers and saying no to illegal immigration crossings and yes to higher taxes. That's why Quebecers deserve a conservative majority government.
We are focused only on earning the trust of Canadians and Quebecers to form a majority conservative government. And when we're talking about the balance of power, I know that Quebecers want their members of parliament to be around the decision-making table. And that is what I'm offering to Quebecers, because there are so many decisions, there's so many issues that Quebecers want addressed that it takes executive decisions. It depends on who is Prime Minister. And Justin Trudeau will not allow Quebecers to have one income tax filing. He will not fix the problem at our borders. He will continue to raise taxes and run deficits and make the cost of living even higher.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
Thank you all.
That was Conservative Party leader Andrew Scheer speaking at the Museum of History to reporters. The debate between all leaders in French took place between 8 and 10 o'clock about an hour ago. It finished. I'm with Danielle Thibault, host of Les Coulisses du Pouvoir on Radio Canada. A couple of things there. I want to focus in on the conversation around the Bloc, the Conservatives and the Bloc, evoking sort of Mr. Scheer, they're evoking sort of a historical a historical take the Conservatives have had before, focused as primarily on the Bloc and the idea, associating them with separatism very concretely.
Associating them directly with the Parti Québécois in Quebec. And basically, Mr. Scheer was asked, and he did that during the debate, and he did it again in the scrum, saying if the Bloc's mission, when they get elected, the first thing they do is start working towards sovereignty with the PQ and in Quebec. And it's something that we've heard in the past from Mr. Harper back in 2009, if I'm not mistaken. That was originally when the NDP and the Liberals were toying with the idea of putting together a coalition to try to topple the Conservatives. They went to reach out to the Bloc, and that became the line of attack from the Conservative, from Mr. Harper, saying, see, the Bloc is willing to join that. And so basically, this is the line that he's been using tonight. It's interesting because Mr. Blanchet was asked about that during his scrum, and he went back to a line that was used abundantly by Mr. Duceppe back in the day, saying, no, I'm working for Quebec interest. I'm working towards the National Assembly's unanimous consensus, meaning if they agree with something and it's good for the province, I will fight for that in Ottawa. And so I'm not taking sides. I'm not working with anyone.
I won't cooperate with anyone I won't prop up, quote unquote, a minority government.
And so if it's good for Quebec, we'll vote for it. If it's not good for Quebec, we'll vote against it. And obviously, the question was asked, are you willing to work with someone, with another party, or how can you work, for example, with the Bloc, given the way you're talking about them right now, if you end up in a minority situation? And not surprisingly, Mr. Scheer said, I'm working towards a majority government, which was also the line that was used by Mr. Trudeau.
Yeah, I was going to say that they just dismissed the minority question.
If you hear a party or a leader at this point of the campaign, 10 days before the vote, starting to talk about a minority scenario, things are bad. And I don't think they're going to
Maybe not bad, but the man coming up to the microphone right now is sort of speaking a little bit about that this morning.
Yes,
this
indeed.
is NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. Let's take a listen in.
I really adored the opportunity to share my statements with people. I really love this campaign because it gave me the opportunity to talk with people and to share their stories and to offer solutions to solve the problems they're facing.
I really love this campaign because it gives me a chance to hear what people are telling us about and to propose solutions to their problems. I'm ready for your questions. Je suis prêt pour vos questions.
Bonsoir, Monsieur Singh, Michel Lamarche.
Good evening, Mr. Singh. Michel Lamarche of TVA News. You noticed that Mr. Blanchet kept within the Bloc ranks the 4 candidates who had made Islamophobic statements. What do you think of that? What does that mean? What does that say about the Bloc Québécois, the fact that they kept those 4 candidates? Well, it's up to the Bloc to decide who they want to keep or not. But what I might say is hateful statements create a problem for everyone because hate doesn't only affect a specific person. It's like fire. When you allow fire to spread, well, it can hurt other people. So if there is hate against somebody because of their religion, it could spread to include people who are hated because of their color, their origin, and all kinds of reasons. So to me, it's important to condemn such hate and to promote a society that is inclusive. But so in your opinion, those people shared hate speeches and racist statements, and they're running to be MPs? Should they have been excluded from their party? Well, the decision is not up to me. If we were talking about candidates in my party who expressed hateful ideas and didn't apologize or did not commit to change, and if I don't have the trust that they've changed their minds, and if they don't promise to do better in the future, and if they share our party's values, well, of course, they cannot run for our party.
Oliver with CTV National News.
Hi.
You have repeatedly talked about how Mr. Trudeau built or bought a $4.5 billion pipeline. It's something you wouldn't do. This morning, you came out with a number of priorities that you said your government would work forward with, but a pipeline wasn't one of them. Is supporting a Trudeau minority government contingent on him not building a pipeline and scrapping the $4.5 billion pipeline?
Well, I've been really clear on this. I am very much opposed to this project. I've been opposed to it. I'll be opposed to it tomorrow, and I'll continue to work against that, for sure.
So if he continues to go ahead with this pipeline, would you support him?
This is something that I'm opposed to, so it's very clearly against what I believe in.
So you wouldn't support a minority?
I'm opposed to that pipeline, absolutely.
Hi, Elizabeth May told me earlier today, and I think she spoke in the other debate recently, that she wants the Alberta oil sands offline in a decade. What's the date that you want the Alberta oil sands offline?
Sorry, what's your name?
My name's Kean. I'm with RNN.
You're with who?
RNN.
I'm going to pass on the question, my friend.
Okay, so do I get the follow-up then? Or you're just going to pass on the question for...
Yeah, I'm not going to answer it.
It's a hard one, or?
No, I'm just not going to answer your question.
So, okay,
Anyone else
so
can ask it,
the follow-up, I guess, would be, how do you have the moral authority to take the Alberta oil sands offline, given Alberta just recently rejected your party in the largest democratic mandate that the province has ever seen?
I'm not going to answer your question, but thanks.
It's a hard one, hey?
Yeah, thanks, man.
Mr. Singh, Andrew Lawton with True North. Will you, having in the past been denied a visa to travel with India, make, if you are Prime Minister, a priority to personally mend that relationship with the Indian government?
Well, I want to be really clear. It's important to have relationships with all countries, and I believe that India is an important country for us to have communication with, to have open diplomacy with, and to be able to have negotiations with. I'm also very clear that I made very strong criticism of their human rights abuses against women, against marginalized communities, against Indigenous communities, and I stand by those concerns. And because I raised those concerns, they had a problem with it. I'm not going to back down from human rights, but I absolutely want to have an open relationship with all countries, and in particular India as an important trading partner, an important nation to which we'll have ongoing relationships, and we should.
Along that vein, will you or can you right now condemn Khalistani extremism? Not all extremism broadly, but specifically Khalistani extremists?
So I'm going to be very clear. People should have the right to peacefully advocate for independence. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Violence is wrong, and that's very clear. And what I've done in my life, people can see from the work that I've done, I've always promoted peace. I've always promoted opposing hatred with love. That's what I believe in, and it's very clearly my commitment. I'm a Canadian. I'm born here in Canada. My commitments are to working to build a better country here in Canada. People can make decisions about their independence in other countries, and that's up to them. What I can say about that is that I defend people's right to have that discourse peacefully and to advocate peacefully.
Hi, Mr. Singh. Tom Perry with CBC News. Could I just get some clarity with the answer you gave a little earlier? Are you saying that you would only back, say, a liberal minority if they agreed to scrap their pipeline plans?
So I made it really clear our 6 priorities. And that includes making sure we work on the environment, making sure that we tackle the environmental crisis. That's something that's really important to me. And that means reducing our emissions and ending fossil fuel subsidies. So that's going to be absolutely a part of our serious discussions we're going to have in order for us to move ahead with anyone. What we made really clear is the environment's a priority. I am opposed to the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and I've made that very clear.
But could you work with a minority liberal government, given they're the owners of a pipeline now? Could you work with them under those circumstances where they're still owning and presumably going ahead with this pipeline?
Well, the owning is something that they have right now, and I want to work on ensuring that we are as responsible as possible with moving forward with an asset that I would not have bought, but I want to make sure we make a reasonable and prudent decision with what we do with that moving forward. I believe it was a wrong decision to make. Moving forward, I can say I'm very much opposed to the expansion, and I've been very clear on that, and I continue to be clear on that.
Bonjour, Monsieur Singh. Catherine Lévesque, La Presse Canadienne.
Hi, Mr. Singh. Catherine Lévesque of the Canadian Press. Coming back to the 4 Bloc candidates who apologized, but this was a boilerplate apology letter. They didn't talk about their statements having been racist or Islamophobic. Are those apologies valid? Well, if we were a candidate in my party, the apology would have to be authentic, or I would need a commitment that they have taken ownership of the problem and that they've already made a commitment to change, or they will make that commitment and show evidence of having changed. Without that, they can't run in our party or be in our movement. So it's up to Mr. Blanchet to see about those criteria, because in this case, it doesn't seem to me that they really owned their problems and take ownership and accept to change. Rightly, this morning you said you have the momentum, but in Quebec you're at 13%. So how can you say the NDP has the momentum in Quebec? Well, we're feeling it on the ground. Lots of people are interested. When we traveled across Quebec, we spoke to people who were really passionate about us because we represent their values. We've made commitments to address the climate emergency and to help them with a national dental plan. So what we want to do is save a lot of money for people to spend on social programs. And we want to fight tax havens and inequality in society. We feel that a lot of people across the country, including Quebec, that are passionate about what we're proposing and our values. Hi, Mr. Singh, you said, I will not challenge Bill 21 before the courts. Why can't you say, I will not challenge Bill 21 before the Supreme Court? What I said, I've always been clear on this. I said I will not intervene or interfere in this case because there is a court case and I respect the right to challenges before the courts. But what I want to do is win people's minds, and I've always done that. I've been so clear, and I can repeat it in English. But I've been so clear on this. But can you say, I will not challenge Bill 21 before the Supreme Court? Well, it's not a challenge. I simply repeated a fact. All governments have to watch what is happening at the Supreme Court. That's all I said. Thank you all, everyone.
And that was New Democratic leader Jagmeet Singh talking to reporters following the French language leaders debate just over the river in Gatineau, Quebec. I'm here with Danielle Thibault, host of Radio-Canada's Les Coulisses du Pouvoir. A couple of things stuck out there, following up, a couple questions following up on Mr. Singh's press conference earlier this morning, in which he essentially outlined the things that he would need whomever forms a minority government to comply with in order for him to cooperate with them. Pipeline was left off that list, and so we got a lot of questions on an issue that resonates in Quebec very much. So,
yes,
right?
And we're not quite sure exactly which way that would go. It looks like he keeps the door open. Yeah. So can you work with the owner of a pipeline? That's the way the question was asked. Basically, the Liberals have bought a pipeline. Would you be willing to work with the Liberals if they were to form a minority government? It sounded to me like it's not what he would have done, but it's done.
Yeah.
He's not very comfortable with the idea of expanding the pipeline, but it looks like he's keeping the door open. Another interesting question that was asked to him on Bill 21 in Quebec, this religious, the religious right bill, and
secular law.
Yeah, secular law. Thank you. Mr. Singh was asked earlier this week during the English debate afterwards, because throughout the campaign he kept saying, I'm sad about the bill, it's not something that I'm comfortable with, but he never wanted to say, I'm willing to challenge it. He opened the door ever so slightly on Monday, saying, if I make it to the Supreme Court, it might be my responsibility to look into that at some point. He was asked very specifically tonight, why won't you say I'm willing to look at it if it makes it to the Supreme Court? He doesn't want to go there because that's the kind of declaration, that's the kind of statement that would cost him support in Quebec, and he knows that. And everyone has been tiptoeing around that issue because it's complicated in Quebec and it's something that can drag your campaign down. So obviously he's very much aware of that. He's talking about momentum across the country. I'm not quite sure if he sees that much momentum in Quebec because for the most part, the seats that the Bloc are hoping to get at this point are the seats that that are NDP right now. So if everything goes well, and I hate to do predictions like that, but Mr. Singh has a lot of seats right now in Quebec. If he holds on, 14. If he holds on to a few of them, I think at this point we can call that a victory, because early on during the campaign, there's some pollsters who were saying,
he could be totally
you may not keep anything in Quebec.
He might be pointing to, and I think Elizabeth May's on her way, but some of the other numbers elsewhere in the country, particularly recent polls like Angus Reid today showed BC might be a place where he's seeing that momentum.
Might do better in BC, might do better in Hamilton, Windsor, we'll see.
Thank
Let's
you.
listen in. Green Party leader Elizabeth May.
I'm happy with the debate. I hope I can share a bit more about our program. and our vision for the future of our country.
I'm very happy with the fact that the debate covered a number of issues we hadn't gotten to before. I wish there were more debates. I wish there was more time to talk about issues that really concern Canadians. I know I'd had people contacting me from the territories saying we're really not getting any content about the North. We're not hearing about the Maritimes. So I'll be in the Maritimes tomorrow. So with any luck, I can help raise the issues that they have on their minds. Anyway, je suis disponible pour les questions en anglais et en français.
I'm available for your question.
Yeah, Ms. May, David Menzies with Rebel News. Ms. May, in 2015, you stated that convicted terrorist Omar Khadr had more class than the entire effing Conservative cabinet under Stephen Harper. Do you still believe in 2019 that this convicted terrorist has more class than the entire Conservative Party under Andrew Scheer?
Have you ever been to a press gallery dinner? Do you understand the concept of it being ridiculous with lots of humor? I'm sorry, that's not a real question.
Oh, sorry. If this was an attempt at humor, a supplemental question, do you think that the widow and the fatherless children of Christopher Speer, his murder victim, do you think they found that funny, Miss May?
I don't think you understand the concept of press gallery dinner skits, but I will say this: there's very questionable evidence that Omar Khadr committed the crime of which he was accused. It was the decision of the U.S. military to describe something that was in a war zone as terrorism, when in the common sense understanding of the word terrorism, it wasn't. And I recommend to you the journalism of Sandy Garasino, who has produced a photograph that makes it quite clear that at the moment that Mr. Khadr was supposed to have been able to throw a grenade, he was under a pile of rubble. The whole question is very fraught with historical revisionism, and we're not that far into our history. We also know that his rights were violated because he was a child at the time that his father took him into a war zone. There's a lot wrong with that story.
Hi, Ms. May. Kean Bexty, Rebel Media. My question revolves around what you told me earlier today. You said you want to take the Alberta oil sands offline within a decade. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering how you have the moral authority to do that when your party isn't polling competitively in any riding in Alberta whatsoever.
First of all, it's not news. If you'd paid any attention to our platform since May, you would have known that. Our plan is a phasing out of dependence on fossil fuels with a particular focus on just transition for workers. We're very concerned about workers in the fossil fuel sector, and the question of what we do next, framed as moral authority, has something to do with whether our generation has the moral authority to end human civilization within the lifetime of our children.
Do you think that the Alberta oil sands are going to end civilization?
I don't think you understand the science.
I do. I have a Bachelor of Science in Energy Sciences and Energy Economics. I understand quite well.
I don't want to laugh, but the reality of the advice from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change suggests, and it's very clear, that we have very, very little time. The window of opportunity to hold to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius global average temperature increase will close very soon. The effort that must be made is Herculean. It cannot involve dependence on fossil fuels past the year 2050. The need for Canada to ramp down is urgent, and that, as we have scheduled our shifting from dependence on fossil fuel energy to dependence on renewables, there's a huge potential for Alberta as the province that has the best potential of any province for solar energy. There's a huge potential for Alberta, which currently has 100,000 abandoned and orphaned oil wells. Those are oil wells at depth, and 10% of them can be converted into geothermal electricity production using the same workers who drilled them in the first place. The transition from fossil fuel dependence to a renewable energy dependence in a different kind of an economy employs more people, is more productive, and frankly, the science and the pressure that it brings to bear on governments around the world when you use the term moral authority, any government that fails to act has failed a test that is beyond abandonment of, dropping, for failure to respond to fascism in the Second World War. That's the scale of the kind of failure that we're talking about now if we don't act.
Hi, Ms.
Ms. May, Hannah Thibodeau, CBC News. If there is a minority government, which a lot of polls are suggesting, and you're a part of holding the government to account, what would be your non-negotiables?
Well, I was surprised by Mr. Singh's because he's put reducing cell phone rates as relatively equivalent to acting on the climate crisis. And still, the NDP, along with the Liberals and the Conservatives, are planning, to the extent they have a plan, it misses the point we were just making. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change makes it clear that drastic reductions in our dependence on fossil fuel are absolutely necessary. So, of course, we couldn't support any government or combination of parties in a government that failed to have not just actions on climate change, steps that are nice in a general direction, but a commitment that is adequate to avoid the catastrophe that awaits us if we continue down the road we're on.
So may I read into that then, that since the Conservative government would drop a carbon tax, would that mean you wouldn't be able to support a Conservative government?
See, my experience, which is one that is drawn from colleagues around the world and Green parties around the world, is that when you negotiate in a minority parliament, you find that parties that quite firmly held to one view during an election become far more malleable when they're trying to form government. So I don't take anything as firm and rigid. That said, I have to say the chances of Mr. Scheer offering more action on climate than other possible parties in the next parliament are, rather small. But the process of negotiation is that you talk to everybody, and then you see, okay, if this is, and again, this is such a hypothetical. It does look like it will be a minority parliament. I don't know whether, we certainly hope to have enough Greens elected. That's the goal, to have enough Greens elected that we're able to have major influence, particularly on avoiding going above 1.5 degrees Celsius, and Canada failing to play the role that I believe we still could play in the world, as I was suggesting in the answer to the question about China's relative contribution versus ours. Our contribution is in punching above our weight and making sure we have a global commitment that meets what we signed in Paris, which is holding to 1.5 degrees Celsius.
So reading into that just quickly, would you try to convince a potential Conservative government to keep the carbon tax?
Carbon tax is such a small part. I don't know how to begin to say this. Sometimes I get asked the question, is the pipeline a requirement? Yes, you have to cancel the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Yes, you have to keep carbon taxes. Yes, you have to get rid of fossil fuel subsidies. And guess what? The totality of that is not close to enough. We have to set the target at where the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says it must be, and we have to have a plan that gets us there. And right now, only the Green Party and our plan Mission Possible is concrete, detailed, gets us there, and is geared to the right target, which is at least 60% reductions in greenhouse gases in Canada by 2030, which happens to be double the Harper target, which remains the Trudeau target. So nothing but that could induce us to support a government. Thanks.
Tom Parry with CBC News. Can I just ask you, I asked Mr. Singh this, would backing any minority government, would a pipeline be a deal breaker for you?
Again, to the same thing I was just answering. Yes, of course, but it's not nearly enough. Of course you can't build new pipelines and hope to reduce greenhouse gases. Of course you can't keep fossil fuel subsidies flowing and hope to avoid the disaster that awaits us. When the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says the window on holding to 1.5 degrees Celsius is closing and will close forever if we don't globally achieve 45% reductions by 2030, then that implies immediately that the small, incremental, even well-intentioned minor steps proposed by the Liberals or by the NDP, and certainly nothing useful proposed by the Conservatives, you take the totality of that and say, does that give our kids and grandkids a fair chance at the world remaining livable through their lifetimes? And the answer to that is no. The totality of canceling the pipeline, keeping carbon taxes, getting rid of fossil fuel subsidies, doesn't get you close. The ambition in our plan, Mission Possible, is there not because we're politically ambitious, but because we are basing our policies on the science, and you can't negotiate with physics. We are out of time for procrastination and half measures.
You mentioned Mr. Singh's priorities that he came out with today. I was asking him earlier about whether a pipeline would be a deal breaker for him. He said he's against it, but he honestly didn't give a fulsome answer on that. So can I just ask you, I mean, what do you make of that? You're in a contest with Mr. Singh. What do you make of those?
I hope to work with all the leaders after the election. One of the first steps in Mission Possible is that we need to change status quo decision making. We need to change the way political parties seek electoral advantage with every single thing they do between elections, as opposed to showing some moral courage, working together and doing what needs to be done. So I am not satisfied with the NDP climate plan any more than I am with the Liberal plan or the Conservative non-plan, because Mr. Singh has been unable to say that he will oppose LNG Canada, which is a project which would create an additional in excess of 100 million tons of carbon dioxide a year. And he has not been clear on a number of points. They don't have a target in their platform. That's rather revealing. The target in Mr. Trudeau's platform remains the same as what was there under Mr. Harper and is inconsistent. I have to repeat this and underscore it. The current target that Mr. Trudeau claims he will reach, and he calls it the Paris target, is inconsistent with the Paris Agreement. It's the target left over from Mr. Harper. It's far too weak to make the difference that we must make. Je veux dire quelque chose seulement en français pour répéter et souligner.
I would like to say something in French to repeat and underscore the fact that we have to reduce greenhouse gases in Canada to a level that is beyond Mr. Trudeau's target, because Mr. Trudeau's target is the same as Mr. Harper's target. And it's not enough to protect our climate and to avoid the point of no return. We have to do more. Now, time is of the essence, but we have the time. We have an opportunity here. But the window is closing, and quickly. Thank you.
Is Green Party leader Elizabeth May just addressing reporters over the river in Gatineau following the French leaders' debate held earlier this evening. I'm here with Danielle Thibault of Radio Canada. Lots of questions today, not just directed at Ms. May, but at other leaders around the possibility of a minority government situation. What are your red lines? What would you do? What wouldn't you do? She was asked a very similar question that was posed to Mr. Singh around a pipeline and whether that was a non-negotiable. She had a bit of a different answer.
If you compare her answer to Mr. Singh's answer, she's quite clear. You know, it's a deal breaker. There's no way she can work with someone who wants to go ahead with the Kinder Morgan project, obviously. And she says, you know, with that and phasing out the fossil fuel and keeping the carbon tax, it's still not enough to do what we need to do to bring it down, to basically bring down the carbon emission in Canada to limit the rise of temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So basically, if someone was still wondering where was Miss May sitting on that particular issue, if you want to make a deal with her, I think the pipeline's off the table. The question was asked, if I'm not mistaken, by Anna Thibodeau, does that rule out the Conservatives? And she's basically saying, well, I find that when you get into a minority situation and it's time to negotiate, people are a lot more flexible in their stand than the promise they made throughout the campaign. I'm not quite sure if that would be the case in that particular set of negotiation. Interesting to see, though, that the Libs and the Conservatives are ruling out even talking about a minority government. And when you talk to Mr. Blanchette and Mr. Singh and Miss May, it's a totally different answer.
It's a very different story, right? And they are getting, I think, an increasing number of questions.
They're very much aware. Those three,
especially Miss May, she's very honest about it. You know, you can hear.
Yeah, and they're very much aware that this is what the polls are saying right now. It's a clear possibility, and they have a role to play in that kind of scenario. Especially since Mr. Blanchette's already said, you know, we're not working with anyone. We're working for Quebec, and so depending on the number of MPs those guys are bringing back in, the NDP and the Green, they will likely play a role, and an important one, if someone shorts a few seats forming government.
And it's interesting on that question about whether or not she would work with a conservative minority government. And she's gotten this question quite a bit right from the beginning. She has always said that her climate targets were her quote. I think she used even the word, I had asked her, what's your red line? And she said those climate targets. She phrases it in a way that makes sense, but it's still, she says, it seems unlikely that the Conservatives would move on that, but you never know. In minority government situations, sometimes things happen. It's interesting that it has been used a bit to be critical of her as well. Like it could be offensive to progressive voters that you're open to working with the Conservative government.
It'll be interesting to see if that plays against her in some writing.
And here is the final leader to address reporters this evening, People's Party of Canada leader Maxime
with my
Bernier.
debate performance. I wanted to make sure that Canadians get to know our platform, and I believe that I accomplished that mission.
And I'm looking forward for the next days of the campaign. Thank you.
Oui, bonjour, Jérôme Labbé, Radio-Canada.
Hi.
Le journaliste Alec Castonguay vous a posé
Journalist Alec Castonguay put a question to you a while ago. Does Canada have a role to play in the world? You mentioned the fact that Canada should prioritize itself, and you talked about immigration. What role do you think Canada should play in international affairs? An active role with its allies, and in our platform we're proposing that Canada invest and achieve the objective of investing 2% of its GNP in defense, and that's a proposal we put forward. But that reinvestment will only start when we've balanced the budget. So yes, Canada has a role to play internationally, but the key thing to us is to ensure the security and the prosperity of our country. And we will continue to work with our allies, and we will definitely be signing more free trade agreements with other countries so that Canadians should have freedom of choice and be able to buy products and services regardless of their origin. But concerning the UN, we are clear. We will check Canada's commitment in various international organizations of the UN, and we will not be signing the Paris Accord on climate, and we will not be signing the general UN agreement on immigration either. We want to make sure we manage our own immigration policy here in Canada and for Canadians. So the foreign aid target of 0.7%, do you see Canada achieving that target? Absolutely not. We will absolutely cut foreign aid to make sure we reinvest that money here in Canada. It is not the role of the Canadian government to build roads in Africa or to fight climate change in other countries. 0.1, 0.3 foreign aid is about $6 billion, and in our platform, we want to cut $5 billion of those 6. Canada will be there to help countries when there are humanitarian disasters or environmental disasters. But it is not the role of our government to build roads or fight climate change in other countries.
Hi, Keen Bexy, Rebel News. My question is about the $600 million media bailout. I'm wondering if you think, has that bailout compromised the coverage of this election?
First of all, as you know, we won't give that money to traditional media. I think it is not the role of the government to bail out media. I think the media must be independent from the government, not dependent from the government. And we don't know if that will have an impact. Maybe I'll let Canadians decide on that. But for us, we want to be sure that our media will be independent.
And my follow-up on a separate topic is in regards to national defense. None of the debates that, the several debates that the Prime Minister has participated in, they haven't really covered national defense. Are you bothered by that?
I think it's important, absolutely. It's too bad that we don't have time to debate that subject. It is an important subject. Like I just said in French, we must be sure to reinvest for our national defense. We must be sure also to have a new policy for our veterans. But the most important for us, it is to balance the budget in the first 2 years. And after that, with our surplus, we'll be able to lower taxes to every single Canadian and also reinvest in our Canadian forces. We want them to have the equipment that they need to do their job.
would getting our defense spending up to 2% of GDP
Yes.
be a priority?
Yes, that will be the priority, but I won't tell you that I don't think we'll be able to achieve that in a first mandate because we're going to be able to reinvest only after 2 years when we'll balance the budget. But actually, we must have a plan in every budget to increase that number.
Thank you.
Merci.
Dave Menzies, Rebel News. Mr. Bernier, Mr. Scheer did a press conference a few days ago at the infamous Roxham Road crossing into Canada. He spoke about things like hiring extra border guards, tightening the Safe Third Country agreement with the U.S., and I think a lot of people who want more border security would applaud those. However, he didn't go as far as suggesting to build a wall or a fence. I'm curious, what is your position in that regard in terms of tightening up border security via a physical impediment to these illegal immigrants coming into Canada?
First of all, as you know, 45,000 of them crossed our border for the last 2 years. We must fix that. It is a cost for our society, $350 million a year, plus the cost for the provincial governments at the same time for social services. And yes, these people who are crossing our border are doing that illegally, and it is not fair also for the real refugees that are waiting in a camp somewhere. So answering your question, we must stop that. The only way to stop that, it is, yes, to build a little fence at the Roxham Road. And you know, we are very generous with people. We will have to tell them, you know, if you want to come to our country by the big door. And if they come to our country by the big door, by the official port of entry, they will be welcome. But because they are coming from a safe third country, the U.S., they will have to go back to the U.S. And at the same time, we'll be able to help the real refugees. But Andrew Scheer won't go there. And at the same time also is saying that he wants us to have the same number of immigrants than Justin Trudeau. So we need to have fewer immigrants, 150,000 a year. We must be sure to have more economic immigrants, and that's our platform. We're very honest with Canadians on that.
Thank you.
Oui, c'est sûr, je l'ai déjà dit. Well, I already stated this. We're not talking about a wall. We're talking about a barrier just at Roxham to ensure that when people try to cross over, well, members of the RCMP should be there to welcome them and to say, well, you want to cross into Canada? This is the official port of entry. Go and cross the official border. And when they do that, if they come from a safe third country, like the U.S., as is the case right now, they will have to go back to, there. And the cost to Canadian society is that 40% of those people who cross the border illegally will have to be deported in a few years. And that's a figure from the immigration department. So it's unfair. We have to stop this. And we have the solution to that.
Second question on a different subject. As you know, the only reason why I am here, my colleague Cian Bexley is here, my friend Andrew Lawton with True North is here, is due to a federal court order that we got at the 11th hour on Monday. You, sir, were the only federal leader to tweet out your congratulations to that. I am curious, why do you think the other federal leaders didn't have any comment to make about really a groundbreaking judgment when it comes to freedom of the press?
It's very sad that they are not fighting for freedom of the press. And so, you know, you're a journalist. Maybe I like your question, maybe I won't like your question, but your role is to ask tough questions. And, you know, I'm speaking to every media and to CBC and all these media that maybe don't like what I'm saying, but it's okay. I need to express our point of view, and I'm very pleased that you're here. And I think politicians must be ready to face the heat and answering the tough questions. And so, yes, you're asking the tough question, but also other media are asking me the tough questions, and I'm there to answer that. It's my role as a politician, and we are in a democracy. We must be proud of our freedom of speech and our free country.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Michel Lamarche, TVA Nouvelle. Je pense pas qu'elle
Michel
soit dure,
Lamarche.
celle-là, mais je veux savoir
I don't think this is a hard one, but I would like to know if you found Mr. Scheer's statement during the debate when he said, not only are you not going to be prime minister, but you will not win in La Beauce. Do you find that hard to take coming from him? Well, we'll see in a few days. We have just 10 days before the election is over. I have never taken anything for granted in politics. I do my best. I think I can be re-elected in the Beauce, but I'm not taking that for granted. I believe that Mr. Scheer was a bit arrogant by saying that, but we'll see. I trust the residents of La Beauce. I trust that I can be re-elected, but at the same time, as you saw during this campaign, I planned my time well as party leader to go help other candidates outside of the Beauce, but still be present in the Beauce, and I will be there early tomorrow morning. I will be holding a last rally in Halifax tomorrow, and after that, I will spend the rest of the campaign time in my very riding, and we'll see what the Beauce people will do on the 21st of October, but I'm still very hopeful. So your strategy for the rest of the campaign is to focus more on your riding. Yes, because before being a party leader, I want to be an MP from the Beauce and continue to represent them proudly. And indeed, I haven't been too present in my riding. When the campaign started, I fulfilled my party leader obligations, and I will be ending my campaign with the residents of La Beauce. Thank you. Thank you.
That was People's Party of Canada leader Maxime Bernier talking to reporters, the final leader of all 6 leaders who participated in tonight's French language leaders debate over in Gatineau at the Museum of History. You see the location right there. I've been watching all these scrums with Danielle Thibault, host of Radio-Canada's Les Coulisses du Pouvoir. Mr. Bernier, I just want to quickly ask you a question about his seat, because that was the last question he received. Is he in jeopardy of losing that seat, or what's your perception?
It's, you know what, early on in the campaign, the Conservatives and the words around the campaign was, we really want that seat. And they invested quite a bit of effort and energy, and their candidate has been nominated in the riding for quite a while now. Has been working hard. Someone was saying this week, Gilles Bernier, Mr. Bernier, Maxime Bernier's dad, who's a former MP, who's well known in the riding, has been campaigning for his son quite a bit.
And that might make a difference.
And that might make a difference.
I unfortunately have just a few seconds left.
That's
I'm
all right.
sorry we have to cut off, because we're going to join up with The National, which is already in progress. Thanks for watching a special edition of Power and Politics and coverage of the French leaders debate. We're back tomorrow, 5 o'clock Eastern. Hope you can join us then. Thank you, Mr. Thibault.
Always a pleasure.
Danielle Thibault. Have a great evening.